Kate Markert is Executive Director of Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens, where, as a result of strategic planning, an exciting special exhibition program, stimulating and relevant public programs and revitalized gardens, the organization has seen over a 50% increase in attendance and tripling of the membership. The museum has moved from being a private operating foundation to a public charity. Renovations to the campus have provided more public areas, and there will soon be better spaces for the library and collection storage. Kate has been director of the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, Connecticut, associate director of the Walters Art Museum, and deputy director and acting director of the Cleveland Museum of Art. She is co-author of the Manual of Strategic Planning for Museums, first published in 2007, as well as the revised and expanded edition, the Manual of Strategic Planning for Cultural Institutions, published in April 2017. She holds a Master's of Arts in Art History and a Master of Business Administration. Kate chairs the visiting committee of Longwood Gardens and is a member of the Association of Art Museum Directors and Directors of Large Gardens. A Garden for All Season, Marjorie Merriweather Post's Hillwood, was published in April of 2020. We're excited to have her with us tonight speaking about Hillwood, A Garden for All Seasons. So please take it away, Kate.
Thank you so much. Hello, I'm Kate Markert, and I am so happy to be here with you all this evening. I am very eager to share this book with you. There are lots and lots of stories in it. The publication was 3 years in the making. Our shop manager told our publications committee that people had asked for a book that was solely about the gardens. And I was eager to do the research for it, so that is how this project was born. I was helped tremendously through the process. You may know Charlotte Moss. She is a very well-known interior designer. She has many, many publications, and she was a close advisor to me from the very beginning. We'll talk a lot about Erik Kvalsvik's photographs. You'll see many of them as we go through. And Ellen Charles, whom some of you may know, is Marjorie Merriweather Post's granddaughter. She's president emerita of Hillwood. And she really gave me a lot of insight into her grandmother. Rizzoli is the publisher of the book, and my editor was Philip Reeser. He was absolutely wonderful, and I have to say, I think the book designers were pure genius, really, really wonderful. And of course, I have to thank our Hillwood staff. I couldn't have done it at all without their support. So you'll see absolutely gorgeous images all the way through. They're captured very brilliantly by Erik Kvalsvik. He came to Hillwood over 2 years to take the photographs of the garden in every season and every mood. You'll see gray skies, sunshine, fog, snow, late afternoon, whatever. They're simply luscious photographs. So let's dive right in. Marjorie Merriweather Post is, you can see her here in a portrait by Douglas Shondor that hangs in her bedroom at Hillwood. And it was painted in 1962. Marjorie Post was born in 1887. She was the only child of C.W. Post. He created Postum, which you may not know. It was a coffee substitute, although some people have acquired a taste for it. We do sell it in the shop. But he also created grape nuts, which I actually had this morning, and other cereals, and created the company that became General Foods. So that company was Postum at the time he was alive, and it made him a great fortune. Although when Marjorie Post was born, the family was of quite modest means. But by the time she became a teenager, they were enormously wealthy. C.W. Post taught her the business, and she was his only child. And it was a really good thing that he did, because she was only 28 years old when he died. And so she really took it over at that point. She was also not only was she a great businesswoman, she was an important collector of French 18th and 19th century decorative arts, as well as Russian imperial art. You see that on the left of the screen, and that's the entrance to the entry hall of the mansion. And what you see there are portraits of Russian czars and czarinas. And in the center is that enormous portrait of Catherine the Great. And Marjorie Post greatly admired Catherine the Great. Post had many other collecting interests, and she was also a very generous philanthropist. She was an involved citizen of the world, passionate lover of beauty, and that is what brings us to her interest in the gardens. So what you see at the lower right is the photograph of the portico of the mansion in the spring with the azaleas in the foreground. So the book is organized in two sections. The first part is called Marjorie Merriweather Post's Hillwood, and that's an essay about how Marjorie Post approached gardens. And I love that section because it has so many archival photographs like the one you see on the screen with Marjorie Merriweather Post and Lady Bird Johnson in the garden. I really learned a whole lot about Marjorie Merriweather Post and how she created Hillwood through my research into the archives. And I will be able to give you some of the details today, but you really will have to read the book to get the full story. The second part of the book follows the gardens through the seasons. And we have wonderful photographs from all across the garden. We begin in the summer, go through the fall, the winter, and of course we leave the spring as the grand finale. The captions to the photographs in the second part of the book give a lot of information about how we run the garden today. And there's a lot of particulars about various pieces of sculpture, because there is a lot of sculpture at Hillwood, and highlights about the various trees, shrubs, and the plants. So there are a few themes that I will touch on today. We don't really have time to go into all of the detail. There's a lot of new information that came through in the book, but we'll be looking at these 5 major themes as we go through. So let's start. The first theme is that this was in fact a garden to be shared. Marjorie Post was a very generous spirit. She very happily shared her great good fortune with others. And of course, her final gift was Hillwood, which was to be shared with anybody who would really appreciate it. So this quote, which I have on the screen, is from the document that transferred Hillwood to the Smithsonian. Ours is an age in which proper recognition is being given to the importance of preserving cultural monuments of historic significance. Hillwood's gardens are typical of the best way of life that is fast disappearing. So she turned Hillwood over to the Smithsonian on her death, and the Smithsonian actually only had it for about 4 years. They felt like it was more than they wanted to handle. And of course, it was 5 miles away from the mall. So they turned it back. And of course, Marjorie Post, being a wonderful planner, already had a foundation set up that could receive it. So it came back, and it's been a private institution ever since. And when she talks about the best way of life that is fast disappearing, that actually stumped me for a little while, until I realized, you know, she was born in 1887, came into the wealth between 1895 and 1900. So she was really sort of formed during the Gilded Age, and she certainly lived a Gilded Age lifestyle. And she wanted to leave it for future generations to be able to enjoy, learn about it firsthand, but also to be able to enjoy. what she had created. The first thing I did when I started research for the book was to ask the library to bring me any books that Marjorie Post had in her personal library about gardens. I wanted to understand, where she was coming from and what had formed her thinking about gardens. Louise Shelton published Beautiful Gardens in America in 1924. That was a book that was in Marjorie Post's library. And I'm sure the reason why it was there is that it had photographs of Marjorie Post's first home in Palm Beach, Hogarcito, which she had built in the 1920s. The introduction to the book has this quote: "How few would be content to create a beautiful garden if none could see. In the flower garden, the efforts are for giving back. If a garden is worthy of being shared with our intimates, can we close it to the stranger who may need it even more? The foreign custom of opening the fine places to the public is one that we should freely emulate." So I think Marjorie Post really took this to heart. She kept the Hillwood in pristine condition all year round. When she lived in Washington, she was only there in the spring and the fall, but she did all the annuals in the summer, even when she wasn't there to see them. And there are so many stories of her welcoming people to come, or making arrangements for people to come and spend time in the garden, even though she wasn't there. As she was developing Hillwood between 1955 and 1957, it was then she decided that it was worthy of becoming a public institution in its totality: the mansion, the art collection, and the gardens. So this is what you're seeing here is an archival photograph of the Rose Garden. And that is, of course, during Marjorie Post's time. The center of the Rose Garden was a fountain. And she also, in the spring, would have planted tulips there. We do not do that anymore. But we will see a little later what the Rose Garden looks like now. Charlotte Moss captured a lot of the themes about Marjorie's approach to gardens in the foreword, which she was kind enough to write. She says, "Hillwood is essentially an offering of beauty to the general public from a woman who had not only the means to endow it, but also, first and foremost, the heart, as she stated, to share this with the rest of the world." Marjorie Merriweather Post did not require a spade to create the garden at Hillwood. It was her vision, her generosity, and her determination that created it, her gift of a living, thriving work of art. So here's a wonderful photograph of Marjorie Post, another archival photograph of her with one of her prized dahlias from the cutting garden. And we'll touch on each one of these themes in her approach to gardens. So there are no anecdotes about Marjorie Post digging in the garden herself. She knew a lot about plants. She could speak knowledgeably about them, but she really wasn't one to do the planning herself. She specified the overall design, and she asked landscape designers to realize her ideas and suggest individual trees, shrubs, plants. So you see, this is a wonderful quote that is a letter that's in Hillwood's archives that Marjorie Post wrote to Macmillan and Company at the very beginning of her renovations to Hillwood in August of 1955. And they were kind of doing directing all of the work there. She writes to them, "I am wondering if perhaps you might have a line on some garden design firm. I feel I'm going to need some advice on the new garden at Hillwood and will be wanting to contact as large and as well organized a unit as I can, because I will probably be needing information as to where we can obtain certain types of plants, trees, and so forth, as well as suggestions for arrangements. On the other hand, we may simply need to consult them only for advice. I just love the confidence that comes through in this. She had her own vision for the gardens at Hillwood, and she was very comfortable in directing the professionals that she would need to help her realize that vision. Now, every garden at Hillwood was meticulously drawn and approved by Marjorie Post before it was installed. She left absolutely nothing to chance. She wanted to be sure that she had been understood by the landscape architects, and thus the drawings and the approval before the work began. So you're looking at a drawing of the dog cemetery, which is a small garden at Hillwood. And the drawing is made by Perry Wheeler, who was, we'll talk about him later, one of the two landscape firms that she worked with. Notice that he calls it suggestions for planting and location of markers with revised edging. And there is a bit of a backstory to this drawing about the revised edging. Wheeler had sent a letter to Marjorie Post to her summer home, Camp Top Ridge in the Adirondacks, in August, asking her which type of edging she preferred for the dog cemetery. And she responds, "Your letter of August 25th has just come, and I am somewhat surprised with your query with regard to the edging. I recall distinctly that back in May or June at the latest, I definitely said that I preferred the A type of edging and requested that you get on with the work and get it finished. I do hope that you will now stop with all these stops, halts, and delays and proceed. It might interest you to know that the Garden Clubs of America are going to visit the gardens at Hillwood on Monday, October 19th. So I am expecting that this small cemetery will be completed in good condition for the arrival of these ladies. Hope that you've had a nice summer. Ours here at Camp Top Ridge has really been quite perfect." So you can see he wrote her the letter in August. She writes him right back. And you can see that this plan is dated September 17th, which is a month before the Garden Club's visit. I think we can all assume that the dog cemetery was in fact in good condition for the arrival of the Garden Club ladies. Now, beauty is a deep theme at Hillwood. It's from the objects in the collection, exquisite planning for dinners and parties, and certainly the gardens themselves. Beauty was the overall goal throughout the entire estate. And Post's granddaughter, Ellen Charles, spent a lot of time in the gardens with her and, knew that she just loved the beauty of the gardens. Now, we often think of spring as the big season at Hillwood, but if you look through Erik's photographs, and there are the 4 seasons right on the screen, summer, fall, winter, and spring, there are fabulous photographs of Hillwood in every season. But honestly, we have more photographs of Hillwood in autumn than in any other season. Rizzoli was thrilled to be working with us because we had so many high quality, luscious photographs to choose from. There were literally hundreds of great photographs that we weren't able to use in the book. But of course, we use them in lots of other ways now. Now, one of the real delights of strolling through Hillwood is experiencing all of the different moods in the gardens, from the most formal in the French parterre. And you can see it's a black and white photograph. That's an archival photograph. And you can also tell it's an archival photograph because those are students there in their pearls and white gloves and ties and pumps. We still have students. They just don't look like that. Anyway, so you have a very formal garden in the French parterre, and then absolutely adjacent to it is this blousy informality of the snowball viburnums around the putting green. Another thing seeing the archival photographs makes really clear is how careful Hillwood has been maintaining Post's vision. And I'm sure you can imagine it takes meticulous care, a whole lot of energy, and a zeal for perfection to maintain. No one ever said these were low maintenance gardens. They are not. But here on the screen now on your left is a contemporary photograph of the French parterre. And you can see how very much it looks just like the other one, except it's in color, minus the students in the pearls and the gloves. And what I want to emphasize now is that there is this incredible, careful relationship between the interior and the exterior. So those two French doors at the end of the parterre are in the French drawing room in the mansion. And of course, in Post time, you could walk out the French doors and from the drawing room into the French parterre. There's wonderful circulation throughout, indoors and outdoors. But there is this beautiful relationship between the French drawing room and then right out into a very formal French garden. Quite deliberate. And I will note also that's the fog in this photograph. Now, Marjorie Post bought this 25-acre estate in 1955 when she was 68 years old. She knew that it would be the last great estate that she would have. She'd had a number throughout her life. And what you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen is an archival photograph that was taken for Vogue magazine in 1957. Of course, she's 70 years old here. And I have to tell you, this is an Charles James dress. It's an absolutely sensational dress. And this is 250 carats of emeralds in this brooch. Luckily, we still own the brooch. This necklace, by the way, is in the Museum of Natural History in the Hall of Gems and Jewels. Anyway, she had spent 2 years from 1955 to 57 renovating the house and garden. And she decided during these renovations that it would be left to the nation as a museum. She wanted to create the perfect setting for her collections, but she was also creating a great setting for gracious entertaining and living, both indoors and out. And the original name of the house was Arbormont, which of course in French is wooded hill. And so she turned it into Hillwood. And Hillwood was also the name of her estate in Long Island that she had it became a university. I love that. But anyway, she no longer owned the Long Island home. So she reused the name Hillwood for the Washington estate. Now, Arbormont itself was built as a residence for Colonel and Mrs. Henry Parsons Irwin. And the architect was a man named John Debert. The gardens were designed by Willard Gephardt and Rose Greeley. We are very fortunate to have these images of Arbormont that are from a series of Irwin Christmas cards that were given to Hillwood by their descendants. And what they reflect is you can see that Arbormont was really a place for a family with young children. So it reflected the lifestyle and activities of this family of five. There was a swimming pool, There was a stable and riding trails. They did have a circular rose garden. We'll talk a little about that. They had a greenhouse, and they also had an oriental garden. So it was really focused on activities, family activities, and sports that children would enjoy. So Marjorie Post, of course, had a totally different lifestyle, and she wanted that Lunar Lawn to become an entertainment space. So what you see on the left is the original Arbormont with the boxwood LA that bisected the lawn there. Of course, Marjorie Post looked at that and decided those boxwoods had to go, because that was going to be her, what she called Lunar Lawn, because it's in the shape of a half moon. And it was going to be her biggest entertaining space. And she would have spring garden parties where she might have 1,000 people. So she needed not to have boxwoods in the middle of all of that. They were moved, by the way. They still exist at Hillwood. And so that's one of the major changes she made, was the taking out the boxwood and turning the Lunar Lawn into a wonderful space for entertaining. And then, and we can talk about a few of the other changes as we talk about the architects. So Enchanting and Webel was a large and important Long Island firm that was established in 1931, and they worked for a lot of wealthy clients in and around New York. They were probably that large, well-organized firm that Macmillan and Company, also being out of New York, suggested to Marjorie Merriweather Post. And they were the first firm that she worked with from 55 to 56. Umberto Innocenti was the consummate plantsman, and Richard Webel, so Umberto Innocenti was out in the garden. Richard K. Webel was really the draftsman. So he was much more academic. And we will look at some of their work at Hillwood, and then we will turn to Perry Wheeler, who worked there from 56 to 59. They started, Innocenti and Webel started with the new entry drive, which wound up the hill. And I'll show you a diagram of that in just a minute. They added these beautiful stone terraces to the hillside. And for years, you really couldn't see the terraces just because there was no way to approach them up close. But we added a walk in 2016 that allows you to really enjoy them up close. It's dedicated to Adelaide Close Riggs, who was the first president of Hillwood's Board of Trustees and Marjorie Post's eldest daughter. So you can see them in the wintertime when the leaves are off the trees and you know what you're looking for. You can see them stacked up on the hillside. So I want to just take a minute. I know this is not as colorful as some of the other photographs I've had for you, but I just want you to take a look at, this is the original plan for Arbormont. You came up Linnean and went directly into, this is the motor court here. Of course, it's blind. Here's the house. So there was one way in and one way out. So maybe you could have 2 cars, 3 cars here, but you certainly couldn't have 1,000 people for a garden party. So Marjorie Post adds this very beautiful, leisurely drive that comes, this is a hillside, comes up the hillside. These are the stone terraces that are stacked up on this hillside that you can see as you drive up. But the genius is that she takes this blind motor court and adds an exit here so that you come in, you drop your passengers off, they go into the mansion, then you can take either, park at the back or wait out on Linnean or whatever. But what is so Marjorie Post about all of this is that she creates this exquisitely landscaped hill really dramatically different from that straight shot right off of Linian that Arbormont had. That, of course, becomes the secondary drive. But she created this incredibly smooth flow of vehicles in and out of the space, but it's a really elegant and practical solution. So it's very Marjorie Post to have it be very practical, but very elegant at the same time. Now, I had mentioned to you that Richard Webel was this wonderful draftsman, and this is one of his drawings of the French parterre. And the enchanting and Webel were known for strong formal geometries, axes, and of course, this really evokes a European garden. And what you see there is not only the French parterre, but right above it, the terrace. There's a wonderful little pocket garden. It's an octagonal shape. And that really serves as an anteroom to the French parterre, which is accessed through that arched ivy entryway. It's just a really charming small space. So Perry Wheeler took over in 1956, towards the end of 1956. Adrian Higgins, whom I'm sure all of you know, writes for the Washington Post. And in 2017, he did an article about Perry Wheeler, and he called him an urbane Southerner. I just love that, urbane Southerner. And he was born in Cordele, Georgia. He got a BA in landscape architecture in 1937 and moved to DC after his World War II service in the camouflage unit. Perry Wheeler was very well known in Washington. He worked for lots of DC tastemakers, including Bunny Mellon on the Rose Garden in the Kennedy White House. Now, Perry Wheeler worked on a number of the gardens at Hillwood. We'll talk a little bit about the Rose Garden, which you see in front of you. This is what the Rose Garden looks like today. Marjorie Post is buried at the center of the Rose Garden at the base of that obelisk. Perry Wheeler kept the circular shape of the original Gephardt Rose Garden. But he did create a very elegant series of crown shapes, and they are separated by brick walkways. And he completed Hillwood's garden in 1957. I'm sure you all know that the Rose Garden at the White House is 1961. So I like to think that Perry Wheeler became known for rose gardens because of Hillwood, and then worked with Bunny Mellon in 61. He also laid out the Lunar Lawn, and he installed the putting green, which is adjacent to this rose garden, as well as the dog cemetery, which we've already talked about a little bit. So next we will turn to his design for Friendship Walk. Now we're going to be talking about two major additions during Post's lifetime, major additions to the gardens. So they were established by 59, but then a couple of additions happened later. So the first one is Friendship Walk. This quote is in the letter, because Friendship Walk was organized in secret, 1956, by 5 of her closest friends. And her friends wrote to other close friends of hers and asked for contributions to buy sculpture paving and shrubbery for the walk. And this is a quote from the letter. They wanted to create a testimonial to Marjorie. We are fully conscious of her love of beauty and the endless care she gives to her gardens. Of course, the letters were sent to only her closest friends, And of course, they were diplomats, Supreme Court justices, ambassadors, generals, senators, socialites, cabinet members, and her staff. But knowing Marjorie Post, they didn't just come to the house and start digging in her garden. They had Harry Wheeler design the garden, and then they presented the design to her, made sure she was okay with it, and then they installed it after she was aware of what they were doing. There were lots of letters that are very similar to this. This is a letter from Anna Case McKay to Conger Pratt, who was one of the 5 who was creating the garden in secret. She was also she was an American soprano, and she had some great jewelry that she bequeathed to the Smithsonian. So you might see some of her jewelry in the Smithsonian too. But I love this quote. "I know of no one more worthy of this recognition than Marjorie Post, or more kind and generous, yet withal so modest. I am delighted and indeed greatly honored to join you in this lasting expression of love." Her sentiments really echo that of many others that are in the files. You know, Marjorie Post deserved this special recognition because of everything she had done for everybody else. Those who were asked were really thrilled to be, you know, on the list of people to have been honored in this way. And they saw this as a permanent testimonial of their life, of their love for her. And it's really quite moving. Marjorie Post's intimates knew well her sophisticated taste in the decorative arts, and they were aware that the house is, you know, going to become a museum and of French and Russian decorative arts. So you don't just buy her any old sculptures. So these are lead cherubs here that represent the 4 seasons, and they're an extremely rare complete cast a complete set that was cast in the late 18th century, set on limestone bases. And it has the names of everyone who contributed are around the bottom of these bases. So there were a lot of people who contributed to this. Now you can hardly see, but in the back here are 3 bronze eagles, and they were made by Paul Wayland Bartlett and given by his stepdaughter, Caroline Ogden Jones Peter. So that is the what's called the 4 Seasons Overlook, which is the end of Friendship Walk. Now, the second addition to the gardens that I absolutely have to tell you about is the flagpole. And one of the delights of researching this book was really looking at all of these original materials. There's telegrams, thank you notes, bills, all that sort of thing. And this is a telegram that Commander Clyde B. Alt, who was Hillwood's general manager, wrote to Marjorie Post. She was on vacation on her 75th birthday, and this telegram arrived. "Now hear this, now hear this. To the Commodore," obviously that's Marjorie Post, "all hands of all branches of the service." Now, the all hands of all branches of the service, at that point, she was married to Herbert May, and he had an estate in Pittsburgh, and she had 3 estates. She had Hillwood, she had Mar-a-Lago in Florida, and Top Ridge. So he's talking to all branches of the service. "Salute you on your birthday and beg to present you, in honor of this special occasion, flagstaff with yardarm to fly the Stars and Stripes and house ensign aboard the flagship Hillwood. Positive bearings to the Commodore's decision. Respectfully, officers and crew." Now, all of these nautical references are because Marjorie Post very famously owned the Sea Cloud, which is a four-masted, 340-foot sailing yacht, which you can still book passage on it. That's another whole story. But she loved the Sea Cloud, and in what they wanted was to be able to use the flag from the Sea Cloud, which is a little yellow pennant, and they wanted to be able to fly that on that yard arm, and to be able to say, Marjorie Post is in residence, and if she was at one of her other estates, it wouldn't be flying. So, of course, all of this nautical talk, Marjorie was completely delighted with the idea. And again, it's one of those things, they're asking her if this is something she would like, and if she would like it, then they would do it. At the same time, Commander Alt was writing to the staff from all of the four places, and he writes to them, the one thing that Hillwood lacks is a flagstaff with the yard arm, once again, that Mrs. May's, because she was married to Herb May, that Mrs. May's house ensign can fly, reminiscent of the Sea Cloud. So he wrote to all of the staff from all of the four properties and invited them to participate to any extent you might wish. And there was an outpouring of response. Over 100 contributions came in, from $2 to $300. And there are 8 bronze tablets around the base of the flagpole that bear the names of all of the participants. And then this document, this beautifully calligraphed document, was presented to Post. And here's a picture of the ceremony. So her birthday's in March. They did have the flagpole made. It was installed, and she had a celebration the weekend of October 19th to the 21st, 1962. Now, of course, this being Marjorie Post, the staff was put up in hotels from Friday through Sunday and given tickets to the symphony, for she was a big patron of the symphony. Then they had the event on Saturday, October 20th. And there were wonderful thank you notes. And I just picked this one to share with you. I believe you to be the 2 most marvelous and exceptional persons in the world to open that beautiful home to us and to treat us so royally. I felt like Cinderella most of the time. Carrie Russell was somebody who worked for Marjorie Post. Now, Gerson Nordlinger was a friend of hers who attended the ceremony. And he says, "You've heard the old saying that no man is a hero to his own valet. I guess you're the exception needed to prove the rule, for it's obvious that your heroine, goddess, and Lady Bountiful rolled into one for everyone from the gardeners up." So the more you research Marjorie Post, the more impressed you are, not only with her intelligence, but really with her humanity. She was really a marvelous person. So that's the archival section. That's the first part of the book. And so now we'll just take a really quick run through the seasons that are in the second half of the book. You've seen some of the beautiful photographs as we've gone through, but now this is just really an excuse to show you these beautiful Kvalsvik photographs. This is that Woodland Path I told you about that we created in 2016. So it had time to grow in, and it looks very beautiful now. And of course, it's a wonderful respite from the heat of Washington, D.C. summer. Hillwood has a full-time floral designer, and we also have a pretty big cutting garden that's right in the center of the estate. And the floral designer makes arrangements with our flowers that was one of the things that Marjorie Post insisted on, was that there always be fresh flowers throughout the mansion. And these are on the piano in the French drawing room. A wonderful summer scene, so inviting. This is the Lunar Lawn in summer. And those chairs and table and umbrellas are Marjorie Post's very own. And you are invited and able to sit in the very chairs that Marjorie Post sat in. So we love our guests to feel as though they are Marjorie Post guests when they're at Hillwood. Now we're moving into fall, and there were so many fabulous images of the Japanese garden in the fall, but of course it's photogenic in every season. I haven't talked much about the Japanese garden, although there's a lot about it in the book. It's an intimate garden. It was designed by Shogo Maeda as a miniature mountain with a stream that's crisscrossed by paths and bridges. And there's a lot more information about the Japanese style garden in the book, and a lot of information about the many sculptures, Asian sculptures that are in the garden. Hillwood's horticulture staff grows over 17 varieties of chrysanthemums in the greenhouse, and we buy in those mounded forms in lots of different colors that you see them all over the estate. But in the greenhouse, we grow the pom-poms, the spiders, the incurves, you know, all of those kind of exotic types. And we have wonderful volunteers who disbud them all summer long. It's quite a process, growing great chrysanthemums. One of the great things you need to see when you come to Hillwood in the fall is the ginkgo. It's a beautiful, huge male ginkgo. It's a must-see, and of course the leaves turn to gold in the fall, and then you have to be sure you see them, because then they'll drop over, all of them drop over a day or two and form that beautiful yellow carpet that you see underneath the tree. I especially love that photograph on the left, the close-up, where you can see all of those beautiful ginkgo leaves. Winter is actually a great time to visit the gardens, because you can really see the bones of the garden. And there's another wonderful shot of the Japanese style garden in snow, and that is the sculpture of Eros, which is the first sculpture you see when you come into the motor court. Erik Kvalsvik got magnificent shots of Hillwood in every season. And this one, it had snowed. It doesn't, as you know, it doesn't snow all that often, but it had snowed. It was a perfectly beautiful snow. And I called Erik up, and luckily he is in the area. And I said, Erik, you have to get over here right now. And he came and took this perfect shot of the Lunar Lawn in covered with an absolute blanket of snow. And these are two enormous cedars that form a gateway to the cutting garden. And this is the cutting garden blanketed in snow. There are also wonderful photographs of the cutting garden in the summer in the book. And I walked into the greenhouse. This is the production greenhouse. We also have greenhouses that are open to the public, but this is the production greenhouse. And I walked into that and said, you know, again, I picked up the phone and called Erik and said, you've got to get over and get a photograph of this, because I just thought it was so cool to see all of these, you know, all of the plants growing that the horticulturalists are growing for the summer and the spring and summer to go out in the garden. And of course, now we're looking at the cherry blossoms in the spring. We very seriously thought about this photograph to be the cover of the book. It's so sort of quintessentially Hillwood with we have lots of cherry trees at Hillwood. And of course, you can see the sculpture. There's the two 18th century terracotta sphinxes right in the foreground. And in the background, you can actually see the obelisk in the center of the rose garden where Marjorie Post is buried. But in the end, we decided to take the photograph that's like from the other side of that ivy covered wall that you see in the background of this photograph. Now this is one, I mean, I love this photograph. It is a beautiful shot of the rambling roses in the rose garden. The ramblers, as I'm sure you know, have a very short season and they only bloom once a year. But when they do, it's magnificent. So that's what's great about having the book, that you can use it to stroll through the gardens and see the things you might have missed. And the other great thing about having Erik take the shots over 2 years is, of course, we change the edging and we plant different tulips every year. So you have 2 different years of tulips here. One of the double tulips that look almost like peonies, and then the other, the multicolored single. And of course, there are tons of pictures of the azaleas in the springtime, as well as the snowball viburnums that are so characteristic of Hillwood. All of these beautiful photographs aside, my absolute favorite picture in the book is the last one, which is an archival photograph. And this is from Ellen Charles's debutante ball at the Chevy Chase Club in 1955. And this is Ellen Charles. She will be 84 this year, but this is her in 1955. This is her mother, Adelaide, for whom that pathway is named. This is Dina Merrill, Ellen Charles's aunt, wonderful actress. She died at 94 in 2017. And then this, of course, is Marjorie Merriweather Post. And I just think they were so kind to dress in all of those floral gowns so they could be in the garden book. So if you would like to buy a copy of the garden book, you can go to the Hillwood Museum website. We have a store. I would be happy to personalize a book. All you have to do is say what you want your inscription to be in the notes section, and I'd be happy to do that for you. Since you're in the neighborhood, I thought I would tell you about a couple of we have 3 wonderful upcoming exhibitions. The Porcelain Flowers of Vladimir Kanevsky opens in April. Absolutely amazing flowers made out of porcelain. You won't believe them. They're pretty incredible. And then a sensational exhibition, The Roaring Twenties: The Life and Style of Marjorie Merriweather Post. That is really going to be a knockout. Marjorie Post and E.F. Hutton were the it couple in the 1920s, and it'll knock your socks off. It's a it'll be a great show. And then we have a really great sculpture exhibition outdoors, Christine May's Rich Soil, 29 sculptures that will be installed throughout the garden. So thank you so much. Appreciate your attention. Would love to have you come to Hillwood if you haven't already been, and even if you have. So I'm very happy to take questions now.
Awesome. That was such a lovely presentation. Thank you very much. Those photos are gorgeous. Thank you so much for sharing.
They are the reason to buy the book, I have to tell you. Without a doubt, it is Erik's photo.
So we got a really interesting question, actually. Someone wanted to know, in your archival research, did you come across any photos of the parties hosted by Marjorie Post featuring dance performances by the Washington Ballet?
I don't know that I actually saw the photographs of that, but I certainly did come across references to that. And not only did she have dance performances, she was a huge supporter of the ballet. And she also sort of let Hillwood be used by the ballet, and so they would do sort of a gala and use Hillwood or a garden party or whatever. And when she did that, she paid for everything, and they could, sell tickets, but she not only gave them the use of Hillwood, she would have, bought all the libations and food and everything as well.
Wow, that's so generous. That's amazing. You had mentioned earlier about the Lunar Lawn and how the boxwoods had been moved. Where did they go? You said they're still there, but and how?
They are. I mean, the horticulturalists swear these are the same boxwood, but they were moved, and you saw how big they are. They were enormous when they moved them. They also moved, and this wasn't your question, but they also moved one of the gigantic elms that's at the back of the mansion, which is quite amazing. But the boxwoods are around the rose garden. So if you're in the rose garden, you can see there's a sort of a big, row of boxwoods, and those are the actual boxwoods.
That's so fun. Thank you for doing that. We had a question. Why did Marjorie choose to be buried at Hillwood over her other estates?
Well, she knew that Hillwood was going to become a museum. So she knew that, and I think she wanted that she really wanted to be associated with Hillwood. That's where her collection was going to be. I think, and that was really her base of operations. She was there spring and fall. Camp Topridge, she left to New York, and that was a retreat for the governor for many, many years until after the Lake Placid Olympics. And then they sold, they said that it was 207 acres. It's now like around 100 acres. They gave 100 and some acres to the Conservancy. And then it is now privately owned. I've been there. It's really wonderful. And the owner is Harlan Crow, as in Trammell Crow, a big Dallas developer. And he really understands Marjorie Post and has kept, some of the original. He kept her bedroom that is perfectly Marjorie. It's Adirondack style outside and pink and French on the inside. Anyway, it is fabulous. And then the other, her other estate is Mar-a-Lago, and she built Mar-a-Lago, and that she actually gave to the federal government. But then the federal government, for whatever reason, decided they didn't want it, and it was turned back and sold. So the other two estates she did not plan for them to go on in perpetuity. She was giving them away. And she knew that Hillwood would be a museum. So I'm pretty sure that's why.
Well, Kate, I just really want to thank you for your time this evening. This was a fantastic presentation and just chock full of information and really delightful. So thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And thanks to everyone who joined us. And again, I posted in the chat, but you can go to Hillwood's website to find out more information about Hillwood and about the book. And we hope that everybody will be able to get out there and visit Hillwood soon. So thanks so much for being here, and have a lovely night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.